大家好，歡迎大家收睇《週一長談》呢個節目，我係你嘅節目主持姚永安。今日我哋同大家討論嘅咧就係較早前喺溫哥華呢一個漏油事件。今日我哋嘅嘉賓咧就好高興請到溫哥華嘅副市長 Andrea Reimer 就同我哋一齊討論呢個話題㗎。Andrea, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Gabriel.
First of all, I'd like to know. Well, first of we have seen Canadians have seen the oil spill in Vancouver recently. Can you tell us what had happened?
Yeah, well, we had a ship. It was a ship carrying cargo, so it wasn't carrying oil. It was carrying dry goods. But there was a problem with their fuel tank, and oil started leaking into the water. So important to note that when you think about ships, they don't run on the same kind of gas that our cars do. They run on something called bunker fuel, which is pretty sticky. It's almost like a light peanut butter, essentially, and it goes into the water. When it goes into the water, it both spreads out because it has chemicals in it that help it become more liquid, and that causes chemical and toxic pollution in our waters. And then the more solid parts of it become basically like tar balls under the water. So when this leak happened in the ship, it started leaking out into English Bay and into the waters in the harbour of Vancouver. Still getting estimates about the amounts, but somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 litres of bunker fuel that was spilt into the water. Of course, water moves, it doesn't stay still, so that the oil spill ended up on our beaches, both on the North Shore as well as Vancouver beaches.
Well, we read from the news that the mayor actually was quite critical on how the federal government handled this matter. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, it was quite frustrating for us, as you can imagine. I mean, nobody ever wants to see an oil spill of any kind off Vancouver's harbors, but we are a port city, so we do have a lot of traffic moving in and out by water. We had, as early as 2010, there was a oil platform that had an accident in the Gulf of Mexico, and we had asked at that time for the federal government and the port and a number of different agencies that are involved in oil spill response to come to the City of Vancouver's council chambers, and we did a special council meeting looking at what oil spill response would look like. If there was a spill, were we ready? How would who would communicate with who was responsible for what? And at that time, so that was 5 years ago, we had some pretty serious concerns then. It felt like each agency, the Coast Guard, the company, each of them might be able to do the right thing, but whether or not they were communicating with the other properly so that there weren't gaps, that was our big concern at the time. And 5 years later we have a spill and we find out that's exactly what happened. It was a recreational boater who called 911 about the spill. 911 called the Coast Guard. It should have been the ship itself who called the Coast Guard and called what's called West Coast Marine Response, which should have been on site. But all the way through there were these should have moments that didn't happen, and as a result the city itself wasn't notified for over 12 hours that the spill had happened, and we could have contained, if these should-haves would have happened properly, we could have contained the spill much quicker and potentially prevented oil reaching the beaches, but as it happened, a significant amount of oil did reach the beaches, and that of course causes even more concern than a marine spill.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is when we read on the news, well, first of all, we saw the mayor, the premier of BC came out quite promptly saying that what has been handled is inadequate, those kind of things. And then we also saw Coast Guard representative spokesperson admitting that the response is inadequate. But then we also saw another spokesperson from the Coast Guard saying that, oh no, that's not the case. It has been well handled. And then what you're talking about, they almost clean up all the oil being leaked. So it's quite confusing. What is the matter of this?
Well, I think a couple things. I mean, there's no question that the closure of the Coast Guard station off Kitts Point, that was a huge factor.
That was closed last year.
Yeah, closed last year. We're the busiest port in Canada, and obviously this oil spill shows that with so many ships coming and going through our harbors, we need not just a station, but a 24-hour station that's able to respond quickly. We don't have that capacity now. And the crack that happened there in communications is, in our opinion, you can draw a line from the federal government's decision to close that station back. The other thing that happened was that in an emergency, nobody really knows what's going on, right? I mean, you're trying to respond as quickly as you can, and it does sound like communication lines were dropped. It's absolutely the federal government's responsibility through the Coast Guard to be the first line of response, and absolutely the response of the company that owned the ship to contact West Coast Marine. And in both cases, there was a significant delay in what should have been a response time. All that being said, when the Coast Guard was notified, it took a little bit, but when their response was up and running within the 12-hour window, they seem to have provided an adequate response. We're still, so I mean, true when they say that some of their response was adequate, but it was certainly a much longer time lag than you would expect. Best practices, when they talk about world-class oil spill response, you're not looking at a 12 to 15 hour window for response. Had this have been, I mean, this is 2,700 liters, 2,700, 3,000, we're still getting an estimate in. If this were an oil tanker that would have had this accident, you're talking about a minimum of 6,000 times more fuel that would have been in our waters. And if we're having this kind of, you know, confusing back and forth in the media, imagine if there were 6,000 times more liters to be arguing about.
So in terms for this particular oil spill incidents, it reflected that, well, what the provincial and federal government has been talking about establishing, or we are going to have world-class oil spill prevention and response system is not in place right now.
No, it's definitely not in place. And in fact, since 2010, when we had our special council meeting to bring forward the industry and federal government and the province to better understand oil spill response, we've actually lost several pieces that were in place then. We had concerns then about our ability to respond, and we've even lost some of that. The Coast Guard really is kind of a quarterback of response for oil spill, and without a Coast Guard station on the ground next to the harbor where the shipping is happening, deep concerns about what that looks like, and that's only been increased by watching what happened with this spill.
Yeah, but the thing is actually, well, the closure of the Coast Guard station in Kislano in Vancouver, that's actually quite mind-boggling, because I was told that the cost per year is less than $1 million. And you know that, well, Vancouver as a shipping port is getting more and more busier. And then with such a low cost, and then in one of the busiest ports in Canada, and the federal government will have closed it. Did they ever explain why they have to close that station?
Not adequately. I mean, we were told that it was cost pressures, but you know, we run a government as well. I'm elected to a city government. There are costs associated with running a city. So what you have to weigh off is, do the costs for providing the service, whether it's a traffic light or a sewage plant or housing for people who are homeless, do these costs outweigh the negatives associated with it? Is it worth spending this money? $1 million a year for a Coast Guard station, I can guarantee you we suffered more than $1 million in reputational damage as a city as a result of having a spill like that in our harbor.
Yeah, especially I think for this particular spill, it happens, well, first of all, it's a new ship. The second thing is actually it's good weather, calm sea, and then still, well, this spill lasted that long. Think about that, well, when it is rough weather, rough sea, and then in a remote area, how much damage would that be?
Yeah, and I should have emphasized that if you're going to have a spill, you couldn't have had better conditions for it. I mean, it was a beautiful, mild spring day, no wind, which is a huge factor. There weren't swells out on the ocean. It was very calm water. And again, it was bunker fuel, not the kind of crude oil that's being transported by the oil tankers. So if one can be lucky about an oil spill, we were as lucky as you could be, but still you had images going out around the world, aerial images of our harbor that portrayed a very negative view on Vancouver. People come here from all over the world because they see a beautiful clean ocean, they see beautiful clean air, they see beautiful green mountains. That oil spill picture does a tremendous amount of damage to our reputation, and that does a lot of damage to our economy.
The Coast Guard people claim that pretty much all the oil being spilled, except for half a gallon of oil has been recovered. And then, is that true? Because, well, if this is the case, well, then I think we have quite an impressive oil cleaning system. And then if that is the case, do we still need to worry any future oil spill?
We're still getting independent verification on that, and really it's the time period in which the oil disperses. So if you have a world-class response system, experts say that you should be able to get on the ground, particularly in a harbor. Like, we weren't talking about a remote location, we're talking about, you know, an area just offshore of close to 2.5 million people. So that this is an area we should be able to respond at a world-class time, which would be between 30 minutes and 3 hours at a maximum. If you were able to do that kind of response, the ship could have been boomed in a way that no oil would ever have reached the beaches of Vancouver. And certainly you wouldn't have had the pollution in the waters that we're concerned about. So we still have beaches that are closed in the city of Vancouver. We still have looking at environmental and health impacts and what the long-term impacts of this relatively minor spill will be.
So from what you just mentioned to me, if there are beaches still being closed, that means the cleanup is not completely finished. It's not as effective as the government spokesperson mentioned that, well, all the oil has been cleaned up except for a gallon or something.
I think their words might have been contained, which is different than cleaned up.
Okay.
And also to remember, I think it's challenging for us because most of us don't have experience with bunker fuel or what's called diluted bitumen, which is what they're transporting in the oil tankers. It's not like the gas in your car. So if you found, if there was a gas can in your yard, you could just pick it up and take it somewhere and dispose of it. And you wouldn't be worried about potentially coming into contact with gas on the handle or something like that. In the case of bunker fuel, highly toxic substance. It has a number of chemicals that are used to dilute it to make it liquid enough to be able to run a ship. And as a result of that, we don't want anyone coming into contact with that. Certainly no human, and ideally no wildlife, no birds, no fish, no anything. So has it been contained to that level that we feel comfortable that people should be using the shores and the beaches? We still wait for some health information in some areas.
OK， yeah， 好啦，我哋呢一節咧就講到呢度，咁我哋下一節翻嚟咧就同大家再講得從呢個漏油事件再去睇深一層，究竟如果溫哥華真係會有一條將呢個輸油管係擴大嘅話，係會帶嚟一啲咩嘅影響？咁究竟係咪我哋會有更加多嘅一啲 oil tanker 就會喺我哋個海港度駛過？而當有更加多嘅呢啲大嘅 oil tanker 駛嘅時候咧，會唔會嗰個意外或者漏油嘅情況又會更加多會發生？同埋如果真係發生嘅話，個後果係會點樣咧？下一節同大家再討論。